you.
Did you get one of those three? Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we talk about global goal number 6 for the proposed Sustainable Development Goals, which is about ensuring availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. We have a great panel here today, and we're really excited to have a little conversation about what water, sanitation, and hygiene means in today's world. I'm joined here right now by David Bernardo. David is the Senior Manager for Natural Resource Management. He's Senior Natural Resource Management Advisor at PACT, which is an organization that leverages local partnerships around the world in integrated community projects to ensure the sustainability of natural resources. So thank you for joining us, David. So let's just talk a little bit about this whole issue of water, sanitation, and hygiene, and why do you think it's at the center of many of the global issues that we're talking about?
Thank you very much. Thank you, yes, Amanda, for having us and myself here. The issue of water is, it's always been at the forefront, I think, and should always stay at the forefront of communities and governments' minds. Mostly because it's at the center of communities' lives. The issues that were happening, for example, at the moment in regards to the droughts in California, obviously give us a good sense of what's going on and how water is impacting, or rather climate variability is impacting our water supply. But also, you can look further afield to the Horn of Africa, for example, and where there are obviously big issues and have always been big issues with drought and inaccessibility to water. Causing conflict between communities, conflict between countries. And so, you hear time and time again this issue of water is the new oil regarding conflicts and the resource being such a powerful motivator. And so, for that very reason, we have to always keep that in the forefront of our minds, but also sanitation. We always have to focus on sanitation as well. It never gets as much playtime, airtime. Without proper sanitation, you have increased mortality, particularly with regards to children under 5. And so you have a reduced productivity in communities and in governments. So with that in mind, you reduce the climate resilience of these communities as well. And then just generally, WASH can also, for example, result in school absenteeism. And so all the gains we've made in education can be completely wiped out just by improper policies on WASH.
So it really is a systemic issue. It really has impact on education and environment, obviously, but then also economics and stability and kind of lots of areas. So we can't really silo it.
No, absolutely. No siloing, and integration is absolutely key. Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the innovations that you've seen with regards to integration?
Yeah, again, not necessarily new, but nevertheless innovative. We've got these population health and environment programs throughout the world. USAID has been involved, and many other donors, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where they are integrating population health and environment aspects. Something as diverse, for example, in Uganda, where a community, in one of the wildlife reserves, they saw one of the gorillas had died of scabies, and we thought, well, that's strange. It actually was a human strain of scabies, and they pinpointed it to the community nearby, human community nearby, and they saw that the sanitation elements in that community were a little woeful, and so there was a project that was started up. There was what we call a population health and environment project, supporting the community on sanitation, health front, hygiene, and family planning. And that allowed for the community to, of course, improve and reduce scabies, for example, to zero. But it also gave buy-in for the project to do its environmental work in the long term. So short-term horizon with regards to health, and long-term horizons with regards to environment were integrated into one project. So it's in that regard, it was a great and very innovative project. And specific to WASH, for example, a friend of mine working in Kenya is doing some great work with regards to VIP latrines and biodigesters. Basically, a very neat project that basically is looking at sanitation, school absenteeism, and rural electrification with regards to minimizing costs of fuel by using biodigesters to provide fuel for the school. So the school wins, the children win, and the community at large, the municipality wins, but reduce costs.
So I had a professor when I was an undergrad who was dogmatic about the fact that the next major global conflict was going to be a water conflict, and that the fact that we weren't at the time, this was several years ago, paying attention to water in a kind of regional way or a cross-border way was really going to come back and bite us, so to speak. Can you talk a little bit about some of the work PACT is doing in the Horn of Africa? Absolutely.
So we have a project actually called Piece 3, which basically looks at conflict mitigation in communities transboundary, and looking at the issues that are causing these conflicts and trying to mitigate them. And in this case, a lot of it is resource-based. Access to grazing land for pastoralists is one big one, but also water supply might be on the other side of the border, and it's obviously not in excess, quite the opposite. And so we're working with those communities to mitigate these conflicts, and it requires looking at climate adaptation aspects to look forward and provide early warning systems and support the local government to put these measures in place, and just provide the local community to strengthen the civil society to better be able to manage these conflicts and the resources.
Great. So I think one of the things we see, especially like around conflict, but around other issues, is that it's when human rights are being impacted negatively. And the UN has declared that access to water and sanitation is a basic human right, but they're having a little bit of trouble kind of getting Security Council level or buy-in from that. So what do you think are some of the challenges? Why is it hard to get that buy-in?
Yeah, so having water as a human right is I think it's absolutely it's important, but at the same time, I don't disagree that every single human being should have access to water and sanitation. But by making it a human right, you are creating an issue there where you have to reconcile that with regards to pricing of water and how to recover the cost of operating and maintaining water systems around the world. It's not cheap. It's a huge endeavor. And so by making it a human right, you sort of perpetuate the notion that ultimately water sustainability is actually a compliance issue, when in fact it really should be an economic imperative, and provide private sector with incentive to innovate and to inject the financing that is not readily available by public sector, by governments around the world. So I think it is a very very polemic issue, and will keep on being one. And we just have to make sure that public sector, private sector, NGOs, civil society are involved and sitting at the table to see how these issues can be resolved in a holistic, integrated manner.
So we really need to start looking at it as kind of a tri-sector partnership initiative. It's something that where the public, the private, and the social sector all really come together.
Absolutely, but also between WASH and conservation, freshwater conservation, for example, looking upstream at the issues of, for example, we did at Catskills in New York, which basically provided water to the community of New York without having to ultimately pay $20 million for a new water treatment plant. So it's about not working in silos, but working across all the sectors.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So right now on your slide, you should see a slide. Sorry, on your screen, you should see a slide for PYXERA Global's Borderless Community, which is a new initiative we've launched this year to reconnect with the thousands of folks we've worked with over the past 25 years around the world. As you know, we partner with leaders from the public, private, and social sectors to design and implement solutions to some of today's most pressing challenges, from access to clean water, like we're talking about today, to sustainable agriculture, early childhood education, and a number of other complex issues. Borderless unites a community of people passionate about creating positive change in the world around them. It also strengthens our collective commitment to purposeful global engagement by amplifying the stories of impact that continuously inspire us all to do even more. All of you watching this webcast today should be part of the Borderless movement. Just visit www.borderless.org www.pixeraglobal.org/borderless. Sign up to be part of the Borderless community. All we need is your name and email address to stay in touch and continue to engage with you as we celebrate our 25th anniversary. So I'm joined now by Emily Rand. Emily is a water and sanitation specialist at the World Bank's Water Global Practice and Water and Sanitation Program. So Emily, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
You've worked on water and sanitation for a number of years. Are there any changes that you've seen over the past several that have surprised you or are particularly inspiring?
Well, I think that what's coming forth more globally is this change from the Millennium Development Goals to the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think it's really exciting. We're moving away from just access, and we were just focusing on, can we have, but really to everyone. And I think that is really exciting. It's access for all, but it's beyond that as well. It's actually behavior change. With sanitation, we're talking about ending open defecation, which is a big change from just saying, oh, this household has a toilet. Because we know that not all households use the toilet, or not all household members, use the toilet. So I think it's really exciting. I think this current change towards the Sustainable Development Goals is exciting.
Great. So a recent report by the World Economic Forum identifies water security as being the #1 global risk in terms of development impact. How do you think water management, or maybe the lack thereof, actually impacts global development and engagement around the world?
Well, what's really interesting about that report is that it's not just the highest risk because there's going to be this huge impact, but it's the highest risk because it's really likely that it's going to happen. The Water Resources Group 2030 Water Resources Group did a study, and they basically found that if we continue what we're doing right now, we will have a water shortage of 40%. There will be 40% more demand than with supply. So we really need to manage our water. This is a huge crisis that is really likely to happen. And for me, what's most concerning is that it's the poorest and the most disenfranchised who are going to feel that scarcity the most. A third of the population, mostly concentrated in developed countries, will have less than half the water they need.
So let's talk about those statistics a little bit, because they're really quite shocking. Even with pretty substantial gains that were made over the course of the Millennium Development Goals, there's still 2.5 billion people that don't have access to improved sanitation. There's 700 million people who don't have access to safe drinking water. 675,000 deaths a year can be attributed to poor hygiene and lack of access to sanitation. And then there's obviously the economic impact of all of that as well, up to 7% of GDP in a number of countries. So what kind of projects are you working on at the World Bank, or just that you've seen kind of out there in the space that are maybe driving impact in a positive way?
Well, let me first answer the first part. I actually don't think the statistics are shocking enough, because I think it's important to note that, that's 2.5 billion. But I just said, we know, I did this study and we found out that in most countries studied, 50% of children are not using sanitation. So there's this whole section of the population. We also know that health centers, UNICEF and WHO did a survey, and 50% of health, like clinics, places where you go to get, you want to get health services, they don't have water, sanitation, and just a place to wash your hands. So as well, you entered, a number that seems shocking on water, but you have to remember 1.8 billion people use a water source that's fecally contaminated. So these numbers, I think, aren't big enough to really stack the problem.
So we need to talk about them even more.
Yeah.
We need to
well, but I can answer the second part of your question now, if you want. What kind of projects am I seeing? Yeah. So there are some projects that are having a lot of impact. And I would say those are the programs that are really they're not the ones that you see and you probably see some shiny logo next to. Really, these problems are not sexy. They're not exciting to look at. The real projects that are having a good impact are doing things like maintenance. They're doing things like improving policy. They're working on behavior change. They're working with the private sector. So it's not construction of some new thing that I can slap my logo on, but it's addressing those underlying problems. We often talk about supporting those institutions to fix themselves. So those organizations that fix the pipes, let's help them fix themselves. That's what we really need, institutional strengthening. And those are the good projects, and those are the ones that don't get a lot of press.
So it's a lot about process, and it's a lot about building people's capacity to manage process. We talk about that a lot at PYXERA Global, that the only ways you kind of really have sustainable change is through process, which you're not getting the good marketing photos for that. Right. So unfortunately, we kind of have to work behind the curtain a little bit. Right. But well, talking about that a little bit, let's talk a little bit about this kind of regional issue with regards to water as well, because it really is such a, we talk about in the American West or in the Horn of Africa or, in Central Asia where literally seas are disappearing. How are organizations looking at this in a regional way?
Well, let me just add to that. So 60% of fresh water is transboundary. So in the 5 largest rivers in Africa actually are shared by 8 countries or more. So you don't get to say, this is just about me. It has to be regional. And I think that it's really exciting that the SDGs talk about universal access. And in general, I think we all need to move away from this idea of me and my country and people who look like me. It's more and more globally, this isn't just about water and sanitation, that we have to acknowledge that this is about everyone and all humans are created equal. And how much are we going to work regionally is really about, we have to take down those borders.
Right, absolutely. And so talking about that, I mean, how can individuals, kind of everyday person on the street, take ownership of this really complex, challenging issue that maybe, especially for folks in America where we turn on the faucet and clean water most of the time comes out? How can we take ownership of that?
Okay, well, honestly, I think it's a good idea to reduce your personal consumption. And I'm not talking about just water, because the hidden costs, the hidden water behind everything produced. But so reducing your consumption, sure, drink tap water. Don't carry your own water bottle, because it takes 6 to 7 times as much water to produce a water bottle as the water. But really, those things aren't enough anymore. And that's really, our discussion has to, unfortunately, move beyond that. What we need is larger policy and action and land use planning. And honestly, that takes those voting. We have to all vote for change. And, it's easy for us or some people to look and say, oh, those water scarce areas. Oh my gosh, look at that green lawn. That's so bad. But did you know, I was just in India, and you know where my almonds were from in India? From California. So if I'm consuming those, I have to think about my global impact and are the items I'm consuming sustainably sourced? And that is what all of us has to start working on. And I think it has to be a policy shift. Are we sourcing things sustainably? So,
yeah, that definitely, we talked a little bit before about the systemic issue of development these days. So, I think we don't always think about, you mentioned healthcare aspects and lack of clean sanitation options in a clinic. Where are other areas that you think we can maybe make some gains from a systemic perspective?
Well, I guess I'll just conclude with my kind of big thing is that I believe very strongly in preventative medicine. I'm a civil engineer by trade, clean water, sanitation to contain the feces. These things prevent illness in the future. And I think we need to think about water scarcity that way too. Let's do our actions now that will prevent future problems.
Great. Thank you so much. Now you should see a slide on your screen for the Global Engagement Forum and Broadcast. That will be held here in Washington, D.C., November 10th, 11th, and 12th. At PYXERA Global, we believe that the world's most pressing issues won't be solved by one company, one government, or one community organization alone. Rather, we know that tri-sector partnerships, those partnerships that leverage the strengths of the public, private, and social sectors, are powerful tools to address complex global challenges. This is why we are bringing together leaders from across the sectors to create opportunities for them to discuss their shared work and explore innovative solutions. As the United Nations prepares to launch the Sustainable Development Goals this fall, we are looking at ways to explore public, private, and social entities are uniting to move the needle on work related to moving the goals from aspiration to achievement. We look forward to many of you joining us here in Washington for the 2-day forum on November 10th and 11th, and to even more of you joining us around the world for the global broadcast on November 12th. Learn more and register to attend at www.pyxeraglobal.org. Also, just a little, just also join the conversation at PYXERA Global on Twitter using hashtags SDG Forum and Global Goals. We look forward to seeing you all in November. Hi, I'm joined now by Brian Smith, who is the Chief Operating Officer at the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves, an initiative that's hosted by the United Nations Foundation. People probably don't think of clean cook stoves and WASH necessarily in the same space, but you spent a lot of your career actually working on WASH initiatives and more specifically on behavioral change. And that's a real area for lots of learning. So can you talk about a little bit some of the behavioral change that you've seen work and how maybe they can be applied to other areas?
Yeah, glad, and thanks for having me, and glad to do that. I wasn't sure what you're going to ask me because I'm a cook stove person now and not a WASH person. I'm not here to announce some new integrated technology that's going to solve all of our cooking and sanitation issues simultaneously. Although there is a history of using dung and other waste for fuel for cooking. Maybe back up a little bit and I'll lead into the behavior change, just to say a little bit about the Global Alliance. So it's a public-private partnership that was established 5 years ago with a goal to accelerate the growth of the market in cleaner and more efficient cook stoves to meet the needs of 100 million households around the world who still cook basically on open fires. Or rudimentary stoves. And there are actually 500 million households around the world still doing that. And has a huge impact on the environment, on livelihoods, and on health. Actually a larger impact on health than HIV and malaria combined. So 4 million deaths a year. The connection to WASH and behavior change, I guess I would enter it this way. First of all, we're working in the same households, right? So if a family does not have adequate sanitation facilities, they're also likely to be the same families, same households that do not have a cleaner and more efficient cook stove. So we're working with the same households. We're also trying to change long-standing behaviors. People have been cooking and defecating, using sanitation forever, right? So these are long-standing behaviors that we need to understand and try to change. So that's the second thing. The third thing is that when we talk about behavior change, we often talk about changing an individual's behavior. That's important. We have to do that. But in this context, we also have to think about how do we change the behavior at the household level and then really at the community level. Because with both with sanitation and with clean cooking, you don't really get the impact on health that you want if you only change one or two individuals' behaviors or if you only change one or two households' behaviors. You really get the effect when you see the community changing. So whatever behavior change interventions we have, we need to make sure that they're addressing it at that level.
And so do you have any kind of best practices or lessons learned from social marketing that can maybe be applied to the whole community?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I think it's really important that we begin with understanding our audience. So that means understanding the community, understanding the family unit, and understanding the individual as well. We can't, whether it's WASH or whether it's cooking, we can't very well design products and solutions in a laboratory or in a workshop and then sort of make those available and expect that people are going to, suddenly start using them, right? There are a lot of barriers that get in the way of people using new technologies, whether it's a toilet, a latrine, or a new cook stove. So in order to understand those barriers, we really have to spend time with the audience, understand what it is that gets in the way of their changing behavior. It may be financial access. The solutions may be too expensive. It may be physical access. They're just not where I am. I can't find them. But oftentimes they go to more fundamental issues, motivational issues, attitudinal issues. For cooking, for example, it might be, I don't think my food's going to taste good if I use this new stove. It might be for either issue, whether it's sanitation or cooking, it might be, what will my neighbors think when I start to practice this new behavior? Right? Will they think that I think I'm somehow special and that sort of they won't like me anymore? So there are a lot of attitudinal things that factor in, and we really need to understand what those are in order to design effective behavior change interventions. So that's one thing, understand your customer. I think we really need to also find out ways to sustain behavior change interventions at scale. So oftentimes we will have funding for a project or program that is, has a short time horizon and not that many resources. And we try to reach everybody in a country, right? A national level campaign to change behavior. Really hard to do because behavior change requires, what marketing people would call multiple touch points, right? It's not just hearing one spot on a radio, one advertisement on a radio that's going to change your behavior. It's hearing things on radio. It's hearing things from your peers. It's hearing your health worker talk about it. And so when we're able to sort of scale up behavior change interventions that use multiple channels and then sustain those over time, I think, that's a best practice that I think would contribute to behavior change.
At the Global Alliance for Clean Cookstoves, you work a lot with the private sector.
Yes.
And they're very good at marketing new products and new services. And so is there a way to kind of piggyback on that or to use their strengths to engage people in these behavior change activities?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we do work a lot with the private sector, and I know the WASH programs do as well. I think that's one of the most exciting things that's happening is that, we're not designing solutions that are giveaways, right? We're actually understanding that it takes the resources of the public sector, but also the private commercial sector to bring those resources to bear, whether they're human resources and the expertise you're talking about or financial resources to really sustain interventions that are going to have the sort of systemic change that you were talking about earlier. So we do engage the private sector. We work a lot with them to support their business models, right? So that may be, initially they need to have a good business model that's viable, but we can support them with grant funding, we can help them mobilize capital, and we can help them market their products, right? So interestingly, a lot of the cook stove manufacturers, and this may be the same in sanitation as well, do come from more of a product development engineering sort of background and not as much on the marketing side. So we'll figure out the marketing later. And so we can help them with that. The other thing that, from a public perspective, we can do is have advertising and promotional campaigns that lift the entire category, right? So rather than taking an individual business approach and saying we're going to market this brand, we're going to market the category of, toilets. So we're going to market the whole category of clean cook stoves, and that should support all of those businesses who are trying to sort of get their products to market and get to scale.
I think sometimes there can be tension though between the kind of public sector and private sector and social sector. How do you balance those tensions?
Yeah, and actually in our particular sector, there can be tensions between the different technologies that are out there, right? There are a lot of different ways to cook, and a lot of them are improved, and their resources, their motivations aren't always aligned. So what we try to do, we are an alliance, so that works at the global level, that works at the national level as well, to get all partners around the table and come up with plans that will, find areas that are of common interest and come up with plans that will basically benefit all players, all market actors in the sector. And I imagine that's the same in WASH as well. There's just a number of actors along the entire value chain who need to be performing in a certain way to really deliver value to the audiences we care about. And I think there are ways to bring people around the same table, find areas of commonality, and then develop plans that satisfy a lot of different needs.
Yeah, I think it's, one of the things that we find at PYXERA Global when we're working in these kind of tri-sector partnerships especially is this idea of kind of conflicting priorities. And, something that like for example, a government, it's really hard for them to fail. It's hard to innovate because you can't fail using taxpayer money.
Yep.
And maybe there's some, more room for the private sector to have the leeway to innovate a little bit more, and then the social sector looking at kind of areas, behavior change and education, and areas where they have real expertise.
Yeah, that's a really good insight. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thank you all for joining us.